Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Christine Jex, Intelligent Automation Service Lead for NASA's Shared Services Center, and Mike Witt, Senior Agency Information Security Officer and CISO for Cybersecurity and Privacy. And just to kick things off here, let's just do a quick round of introductions. Christine, tell me a little bit about yourself and your role over at NASA's Shared Services Center.
Yeah, sure. So originally I started my NASA career out for 18 years, and I did about 12 years in the IT security / CISO world. And I originally did the first spot from a security aspect with NASA back in about 2016, 2017. And then I left NASA for a brief moment of time for about 2.5 years and went over to the DoD side of the world. And then I came back to NASA just recently, about almost 2 years ago, and to do shared services. So I'm now on a different side of the fence, which is delivering those automations and not the security aspect of it.
Okay, great. And Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Hey, thanks. 30 years in the federal government, majority of it cybersecurity, mainly on the operations side, incident response. Doing cybersecurity operations work around that. Was back at the Department of Defense Computer Emergency Response Team, where that's morphed into JTF GNO, which is now what's called U.S. Cyber Command. So was there when that all started. Moved over to Homeland Security when they started up the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team. Helped stand that up from scratch for a number of years. Moved over to the Department of Treasury. And now I'm over here at NASA, been here since 2017, and basically working to stand up their cybersecurity program here and improve NASA's cybersecurity posture.
All right. Well, two great perspectives on a really important topic, this being zero trust. And I think a good place to recognize where agencies are right now is that every agency's journey to zero trust is going to be a little different here. Recognizing that, what are some of the unique challenges or considerations that NASA faces when it comes to standing up a zero trust architecture?
So one of the biggest challenges that we have as far as zero trust is going in and looking at our infrastructure as a whole, right, to understand it, right, because we're blended in with not just I'll call it our normal enterprise delivery applications that everyone uses across our enterprise. But when you start moving over into our different mission environments, when you start thinking about Artemis and our science, our aeronautics and stuff like that, each one of these are very unique around what they bring on the mission side. Then I will throw in probably one of the more interesting things is, we've got things that are flying out in space and that we launched back in the 70s that are still out there. And that means, to catch that communication back to it, we've still got a lot of legacy infrastructure on our network that we've got to make sure that stays properly isolated, if you will, so that, no harms comes to them. So when you start talking about bringing zero trust, new, I'll call it modern cybersecurity technology, if you will, in having it plug into some of our legacy infrastructure, that's the challenge around it and stuff like that. How do we integrate into some of our environments on our mission side so that we have a zero trust design, if you will, architecture design that meets what we're looking for.
Okay, great. And, I think a particular flavor of this conversation is the intersection of zero trust with automation in however many ways there are to break that down. Recognizing that, how can automation in a cybersecurity context help NASA identify its high value assets, which is critical to zero trust, and protect them accordingly?
So again, from the automation standpoint, that's a lot of the stuff that we're already playing with today and that we're looking in, whether it's a lot of the micro segmentation that we're putting into place now I'll call it on-premise, and putting in a lot of what is I'll call it pre-authorized to go in and out, so that automation's already in place around that, as well as then as we're allowing, I'll call it remote connectivity connectivity into parts of our infrastructure, whether it be to data, whether it be to applications or et cetera, understanding exactly how those systems are connecting and basically the signaling, if you will, from those devices, from the identity and stuff like that. Right, it's just not normal. We're past the days of is the username and password good, or is even the two-factor good. Right, we're getting a lot more signaling, if you will, from the devices. How they're configured and stuff like that. So it really builds into as they're connecting in. What their level of trust we're going to allow them for that interaction. It could be a full-blown, here is your full connectivity. You can do fully interconnect and download data to that device, or it can be as simple as a more of a paint the picture. You can interact with the application or with the data, but you cannot pull any of that data down whatsoever from that standpoint.
Okay, and Christine, from an automation standpoint, anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with everything, because mainly whenever we talk about automation from a user standpoint, we're really just mimicking that human activity. So we're really we're going to take on going through all those controls and those gates. So we're assuming, our bots are credentialed. They're ready to, actually do those activities, and they have access to actually pull down that data. So again, it will probably, once we really get into the zero trust, we'll have to go after more access. Although we are already doing a lot of that. We're accessing, if we're doing SAP or whatever, we're going to have our bots have those credentials to view that data, to read that data, to access that data.
Okay, and just to continue along that thread here, what are some of the zero trust implications for bots? It seems like the credentialing piece of things, you don't treat the credentialing any different for bots as you would for, a human operator on the network. So just tell me how you approach that side of things.
So from an automation standpoint, what we're looking at doing is a lot of our automated response playbooks in our security operations center, within our incident response teams. We're basically looking to take advantage of that. Again, when you talk about zero trust, that automation SOAR, if you will, capabilities that come into play, so that as things are, I'll call, happening on our network, right? We're not waiting on a human analyst, right? Or a human incident response person to do that analysis and apply, if you will, the actual response to it. We want to take advantage. We've already got things that we know that we're going to apply in advance when certain things happen. So we're going to take advantage of that automation. So when those things are triggered, the playbook, if you will, of how we respond to that is auto-triggered and is automatically done without any human interaction from that, right? And we'll still have all the analysis around that, all the data collection around that for future, to go back and look at if we need to at a later date or whatever around that. But that's really what we're looking to do, is take advantage of a lot of our automated response on the SOC side of the house, or incident response side of the house.
And where, to me, automation will actually come in is when you're actually talking about the analyst. So, a lot of times the analyst or some of your tools that you have will do, probably like a cursory view of what it's catching. It has rule-based, but if you have manual efforts going on, we would look to automate that to where you could digitally find that faster. So really, once Mike and them are gathering those logs, it would be nice to have the bots to actually execute and to read those logs, and then have what the analyst really needs to go after. So to me, it's like that 80-20 rule, or whatever that set number is. They would spend their time on that 20% that could be a potential problem, right?
That's interesting, and I'd kind of like to drill down to that a little bit more. Automation kind of, I guess, being a force multiplier for those cyber analysts, keeping an eye on the perimeter, able to separate maybe the 80% you don't have to worry about, and giving the human operators time and bandwidth to focus on that 20% that they do need to focus on. Is that a pretty good way of understanding it?
That's correct. Because we do that even now for some of the stuff that we have even in the finance world, right? So we'll have automations there. So it's not any different. You would actually, set those parameters or what those rules are, and then you would, design it. And that's, we are talking future. So again, but the ultimate defense is to shut it down before it even starts and actually have it deploy. So.
Okay, well, we'll move into unattended bots here in a second here, but just before we do, when it comes to cybersecurity, just tell me a little bit more broadly, NASA's portfolio of unattended bots and what they're doing currently on the network these days.
Yes, sure. So from a shared services perspective, we have about 11 unattended bots, and we have a lot of attended bots, but that doesn't mean that they're attended and they're running, concurrently. But the unattended, they're running financial applications. We have some help desk ones. Also, we have procurement, HR. We pretty much, from a shared services, cover all aspects of utilizations of bots. So any kind of swivel chair, any kind of manual efforts, we're seeking to automate those.
Yeah, and from our side on the cybersecurity side, this is where you heard Christine earlier. Her background, she spent many years on the cybersecurity side working with many folks already on our team and stuff, right? So we've got a good relationship there with Christine and her team out at the NSSC. And so bringing them into, I'll say, partner with us around there, that's something that we're looking forward to take advantage of what they can bring to help us out going forward.
Okay, well, I think this is an interesting intersection of ideas here. The automation, which is, of course, an enabler for the end user and for the mission of NASA. And then, of course, the security of everything that's on the networks, bots included. How does NASA approach identity management and credentialing for bots?
So from our aspect, we use our folks in the ICAM world. So they are credentialing our bots. We rely on them to give us those tools. We will start seeing some changes how they are doing things, but for the main part, we are we are fully unattended and they all have their credentials.
And so from a bot standpoint, even though they're bots, there's still an identity on our network, just like I'm an identity, just like Christina's identity on our network. So from the standpoint of how we monitor our network, how we treat our network, how we monitor what I'll call it users are doing on our network. A bot is a user, just like I'm a user, just like Christine's a user. So should something, I'll say, trigger that or whatever, they get treated the same as far as should something go wrong or whatever, around that. We haven't had any issues whatsoever with any of the bots yet or whatever, but they're treating no different than any, I'll call it, a human user on our network as far as from a cybersecurity standpoint. Okay.
And just to continue along with this thread here, how does NASA determine when it should deploy attended bots or unattended bots? What goes into that decision and that determination?
Yeah, sure. So it depends on what the task is that it's actually going to perform. So you do have some automations or processes that require it to be attended mode, meaning that it needs to be triggered whenever the human needs it to go. But however, we handle attended in our office. We'll write that automation for them and load it so where they only have to click it, so it has its own parameter. But we really prefer to stay in the unattended realm, because that gives that unique identity. Because when you're running in attended mode, that means that it's taking on that person's credentials and it looks like that person. So you can't differentiate when you're looking through logs, such financial logs, to see who made that transaction. So it's a lot cleaner when you can actually say that it was the bot, right, versus the human doing it. So we prefer to stay in that unattended as much as possible. However, there is some areas where we have to stay in attended mode, especially when we're partnering with other agencies, right? So because there is a comfort level with other agencies that they're still, very new to robotics. They don't really want you in your system. So it's a partnership. So it's, how do you gradually get to, okay, we're going to just go in attended mode. They know who we are and they can see our footprint, and then we will advance to unattended. But again, it's how do you start to work with other external entities, because we do get services from other agencies.
Okay, well, just to maybe shine a little bit more light on that, what are some of those, maybe interagency partnerships in which, a robotics or an automation might make sense?
So we're just now venturing a partnership with IBC, which is under DOI, and so that's the ones that we're doing this for HR, around HR activities.
Okay. We've been talking about automation in the context of, some of the security implications, but let's maybe flip that around and look at automation as, an enabler for cybersecurity and, an opportunity to make the security posture a little bit stronger. How can automation help NASA better understand who and what is on its networks at any given time?
Yeah, so automation is the future. I mean, there's just too many things happening, on our network every day, or I'll just say even at our network every day, for the amount of, I'll call it humans, analysts to go through to analyze what's happening. Is this good, bad, or indifferent, or whatever? So we are embracing automation. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that. We are looking at zero trust. Even before the executive order came out, we were on the zero trust train already, and was working with the CIO Council and Homeland Security, specifically going forward into some of that or whatever. So we had already started moving down that road to zero trust. So when the executive order came out, that was not new to us, other than just some of the requirements that came out of the executive order. We had to put the plans together and actually submit and stuff like that or whatever. So we were fully already on board the mindset of not only zero trust, but embracing automation going forward on the cybersecurity side, because again, the volume of things that are being thrown at us, if you will, from the outside, from valid users, right? And having to make sure that is capturing all of those signals, if you will, as they're trying to log into our network, and making sure that someone that just logged in from McLean, Virginia, then 2 minutes later is logging in from a foreign country, right? That same account or whatever, putting all of that analytics together in real time. We've got to embrace the automation side of that to help us make smart decisions going forward.
Okay. And of course, what powers automation in so many ways is the data. From a data management perspective on things, are there considerations we should maybe unpack in a little bit more detail there?
So, on the data side, you're right. The volume of the data that we're going to be collecting to help us inform, if you will, those automated decisions, that's going to grow very, very quickly as well. That's also kind of tied up in the cyber executive order that came out last year. If you think about OMB memo 2131, which is the event logging, and the volume, again, the volume of data that we've got to collect and make those smart decisions is going to go hand in hand with that. So as you see, that move to zero trust, and the requirements in the executive order to collect the amount of security data that's needed, they go hand in hand together around that. So I was glad to see that when the executive order came out, that they were both included accordingly, because they're needed to be successful.
Okay. And as an agency that, as you mentioned earlier, that was maybe ahead of the game on zero trust before, executive order brought this to everyone's attention. You had mentioned that there was a playbook that you guys had put together as maybe some of the lessons learned from zero trust and being, again, an early adopter. Can you tell us a little bit how NASA was able to expand awareness around zero trust and really get this off the ground as an idea across the enterprise?
Well, honestly, for us, we we were due for some changes. I'll just put it this way, for our cybersecurity posture at NASA, going back to 2017 when I first started, that we needed to improve. And so instead of doing what everyone was doing, I'll call it today, back then, if you will, whatever, we wanted to look at technology going forward and take a opportunity to leapfrog, if you will, the way that business was being done, and take advantage of where the technology was heading. And at that time, this is when Zero Trust was really just starting to come out as, I'll call it, buzzwords or whatever, right? And they were still trying to, it was still trying to form exactly what Zero Trust was, because again, it was a little buzzwordy back in that day or whatever and stuff, right? So, but we knew that there was still going to be some maturity around Zero Trust going forward, but we knew we had to start somewhere. So one of the things that we have started with a few years ago that we're doing to our on-prem piece is to set the foundation. Is we're moving to a software-defined architecture on our network side, and that was what I was talking about earlier when you start talking about micro-segmentation across our infrastructure as a whole. We're looking at that as a foundation as we're rolling that across our various centers. And we're in the midst of that now, and that foundation that we're putting in will help us tie in to the rest of that Zero Trust platform as we move into our cloud environment, and then as we move again further into our mission side of the house and work with our mission partners and stuff. But again, we're working to get that foundation laid in at the software defined architecture level right now.
Okay, and just to continue on with that micro segmentation piece of things, that seems to be really valuable for, if there is a scenario where there are, unknown or untrusted entities on the network and you need to shut something down. That seems to be a really key piece of things if an incident does arise.
Yeah, it does. And I will, not only from that standpoint, but one of the biggest drivers for us on the microsegmentation is because of the different things that our missions do, right? So we're, in this case, think of our stakeholders, right? So we've got some very sensitive things that we do at NASA, right? Think about the intellectual property that we develop at NASA. Think about some of the things that we do with astronauts in space, right? So human life, right? Making sure we have those protections there. But then when you flip it all over to some of our other things that we're doing, right? When you start talking about our science side of the house, right? So we're pulling science down from satellites on a daily basis. And again, the volume of that data is unbelievable, and we give that data away, right? So that is low public data that we give to scientists around the world to come up with creative new discoveries and stuff like that, right? So that's very different than our intellectual property. It's very different than protecting our astronauts who are on station now on the International Space Station. Very different than the Artemis program where it's headed, for Mars and stuff like that or whatever, right? So we've got those different levels of security requirements, if you will, in just protecting the various things on our network today. And so that was a really huge driver to take this to the microsegmentation. And the reason I say that is we have to, prior to rolling out the software-defined architecture, we had to basically treat to the highest level, right? So when you lock everything down because you're protecting the intellectual property and you're protecting those astronauts, right, who are off planet and stuff like that, right? That design did not fit well for our other scientists who need access to that, I'll call low public data and treat it out and stuff like that. So we're trying to make our network where it can work and provide a balance, if you will, to all stakeholders on our network and provide them what they need, whether it's at a very, very secure level or a not so much secure level because of the data they're using, we're giving away to the public from that standpoint. So that's really one of the key drivers around that move to software-defined architecture.
All right. And Christine, I'll get back to you in a second here. I want to make sure you're looped in the conversation as well. But you really hit on something, Mike, that I think is worth going into a little bit more detail here, you really hit the nail on the head with, I think, the central tension with Zero Trust is, managing that end user experience and access, but at the same time, making cybersecurity a priority here. Recognizing those two ends of the balance here, how do you look about achieving that balance at NASA?
Yeah, so part of that is, again, we've got to work with our stakeholders. At the end of the day, we've got to understand the systems, the data. And again, this is all about the data, right? We've got to understand, are these systems high? Is that data high? Is that data moderate? Is that data low around that? That helps us then put in the proper, I'll call it security guardrails that Zero Trust allows us to do. Those rules then get put in, will be basically put into place. So as we're allowing connectivity into those environments, the appropriate controls apply for the level of the data that's there, and so that we can serve those, I'll call it, users appropriately around that. Right? We're going to have someone coming in to do access to some of our science data that's low, publicly available. We don't need to have a full-blown identity check, if you will, on a foreign national person or whatever, or scientist around that or whatever. But if we have a foreign national that is trying to access very sensitive data on our network, there is likely going to be a requirement for some type of full identity vetting, if you will, as part of that credential, so that we know who is accessing that very sensitive, whether it be moderate ITAR, EAR type data, or even like very high, high data around that and stuff. So again, that's what helps us drives the appropriate controls around that. Okay,
well, one thing that I really take away from this conversation, and really many Zero Trust conversations, is Zero Trust is not just a cyber concern for cyber people, that this is everyone's responsibility to some degree. And so with that in mind here, Christine, from your perspective on things over at NASA's Shared Services Center, how do you see Zero Trust requirements changing your team's work as part of that journey?
I really think that it may not totally impact us, because I feel if we're giving the bots the correct access. But again, where it will come into play is to ensuring, when we are automating for folks, that we already have to make sure they have access to the system, access to the data that they need. And sometimes access takes the longest, right? From our perspective, because you have to deal with other system owners. You have to make sure that they're willing, and for us to come onto their network and leave that footprint if you're crossing networks, but mainly going into that other system. But access usually takes us the longest when we're automating. Sometimes it could take a month. Sometimes it could take 2 months, just depending on what system you're actually trying to automate for, because you are trying to also educate along the way, because they are very sensitive about their data, right? We have to protect the data, and that's the biggest thing. And are we just not blindly giving credentials out and access out?
Yeah, it kind of strikes me, as so many tech conversations are, there's definitely that culture change element to things as well.
I can touch on that. I will say, walking in the door back in 2017 at NASA, I probably spent my entire first year at NASA just working actually to try to start working to change a lot of the culture, right? And it's not saying it was bad, bad or good or anything from that standpoint. NASA is a very, highly, we've got a lot of PhDs, a lot of engineers here, and very talented scientists and stuff, right? So that mindset of just how they like to operate, I'll call it free and open and stuff like that. It was, it counteracts a little bit from the cybersecurity standpoint. So really have worked hard since not only that first year up through now to help to work to change that culture. I visited every center. I've done town halls at every center to explain, why we've got to start changing the way we operate and stuff. The way that that we set things up years ago, and the way that the way that NASA, who helped actually invent the internet, it's being used differently, right? The internet is kind of a weapon now, right? And so we have to change the way that we operate on the internet from the way that we were doing it years ago around that and stuff. So one of the things that we're doing to kind of help change that culture is, should something bad happen on our network, we not just keep our leadership up to date on, what we're doing, how we're doing those mitigations or whatever. But, let's say after we wrap up an incident, it was publicly known that NASA was impacted by the SolarWinds incident. When we finished up with all that mitigation and completed that incident, which took several months, and we did all the analysis, all the forensics, and we learned exactly what the adversary did and didn't do, we actually turned to our enterprise, all of our users, and we set up several internal briefings, and we did a full not withholding any information. We basically wanted to use it as a learning experience for our users to understand this is part of that culture change. This is why we have to change the way that we've kind of operated in the past or whatever and stuff. Again, not looking at it as, good, bad, or indifferent or whatever, but again, taking advantage of what we learned from the incident and letting everybody learn from it, right? Not just brief our leadership. And that was probably one of the big changes that happened. So we're really trying to work and share that out with our users when things happen on our network so that they understand why we're making changes to our network.
That's a really key piece of it, Mike. I think the Solarwinds breach was obviously the thing that put zero trust on a lot of people's radar, maybe the general public, but that is definitely the kind of thing we love to hear is, any organization taking full advantage of an incident, and making it an opportunity to be stronger and better going forward. One other thing that I think is always comes up with zero trust is that, you're never done, right? There may be deadlines in the executive order of what agencies need to hit, but you never get to say mission accomplished. We can, call it a day. This is always something that's going to be a going concern. Recognizing all that, Mike, where do you think NASA is in terms of the spectrum of zero trust from getting started to, I guess getting to a, cruising altitude, I guess, of where you would like to be?
No, good question. In all honesty, I think we're still in the early stages. Although we've started planning this several years ago, and we're actually doing some implementation now, as I mentioned earlier, with the software-defined architecture and stuff. We have also submitted our zero trust plan that the cybersecurity executive order called out to OMB and DHS for their review, and we're continuing to work with them to flush that plan out, so all parties, if you will, are on board with the way that our plan is submitted to go forward around that. And I think it's important to note that there's not one plan for the federal government. Every agency is very different in the way that their various missions, if you will, and the way that they have to implement a zero trust designed for their network and stuff. So I'm actually very happy that OMB and CISA is working with us kind of one-on-one, because that's what they are doing, one-on-one, to understand our uniqueness, right, around that. And we've got really good dialogue with them, and working forward to get that. I can say we're not at day one, we're not at week one on this or whatever, but we are still in the early stages of this endeavor, and it is going to be a multi-year journey to get to where we need to be.
Okay. And of course, I did mention earlier the Biden administration's executive order on this. I think that did put this on the map for everyone, really, agencies, and organizations across the board, in terms of getting this right, in terms of making this a priority. I recognize NASA was doing this, maybe before it was cool, zero trust, but how have you seen that executive order perhaps elevate the role of let's say, automation and bots when it comes to cybersecurity more broadly and zero trust more specifically?
From my angle, the one thing I would see is, even though we're starting to embrace it, NASA, right? Again, every agency is at a different level of matureness. I'll just put it that way. And I think it really is pushing all agencies to move forward and explore maybe things that they have challenges with. Christine kind of talked earlier, right? You know, we work with external agencies, and like she said, they've got to get that buy-in from them on, because some of them are their systems that we're externally accessing from that standpoint, and we've got to make them comfortable with that or whatever. And that's just it. Some agencies have zero experience in working with bots, whereas we've been working, as Christine said, a number of years now with them. So we have a lot more comfort with them in our environment than other agencies are. And what that executive order is going to do, it's going to push us where we get out of our comfort zone as a collective, I'll call it government, and put us again moving forward to take advantage of technology where we need to be around this.
Right. And I'll just add just a tad to that. And it's not also just the agencies, right? It's almost subset, right? So financial, you see a lot of automations across the federal space, but then HR activities, because of the sensitivity of the data, it's a slower, folks not willing to really they're shy of automation, if that makes sense. And it's duly noted, because that is sensitive data. And when you do those types of activities, you do need to take your time on not just in making sure it's right. So you can understand why in the different fields that some things are just really easy to automate. There's a level of trust, but again, that trust really has to be there, because you are dealing with sensitive data in a lot of aspects. Not saying financial data is not sensitive, but it's just the level of comfort and the level of that data being available.
Yeah, no, there's obviously orders of magnitude to these things. It's all
right.
relative. Of course, Mike, you mentioned earlier, there's it takes a village when it comes to zero trust. And you mentioned some interagency partners, CISA being one of them. OMB is setting the tone from the top here. But looking within NASA, which is itself a pretty big enterprise, what kind of working groups or what kind of forums is your agency standing up to make progress on zero trust, and really to have an ongoing dialogue when it comes to this?
So we actually have a working group stood up within NASA that is formed in, I'll say, within the CIO organization, but we have stakeholders across all of our mission environments on that working group. And we also have stakeholders at senior level, at senior leadership levels across all of our centers as well. Right. And that's making sure that we've got the right level, not of just technology experts, but of leadership to help make sure that we're actually driving down and moving this forward so that we can meet the appropriate deadlines, and that we are moving and pushing the technology and requirements and identifying the requirements going forward around this. So the working group is pretty much made up of almost every organization inside NASA.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. And recognizing that NASA is a pretty distributed place, there's a presence across the country. And we of course live in a day and age where a lot of agencies, have now a more distributed workforce by virtue of, telework being more of a reality and remote work being more of a reality. To tie all these threads together, the automation piece of things, the zero trust piece of things, how do you see those supporting a decentralized workforce, in which, users may be connecting to the network from any number of places?
Well, I will say that good, bad, or indifferent, the pandemic over the last 2 years, I think really helped not only NASA, but probably other agencies. I think it really pushed agencies to get into working remotely and the way that we kind of operate and stuff like that. And again, the lessons learned that we did over the last 2 years, don't get me wrong, we still had to have excuse me, certain positions that did have to come on site and work on site the last 2 years, right? There are some of those positions. Some of those were actually underneath me. I have cybersecurity positions that worked on site at NASA for the last 2+ years during the pandemic, the entire time frame. And we have some on our mission sides that had to work on site at our centers over the last 2 years. But we had probably close to 90% of NASA working remotely for 2 years, and we didn't miss a beat. It worked out really well. And I think that's what helped us around this. So as we go forward, working into this, and like you said, the decentralized, I think what we've learned over the last 2 years, I'll call it from a future of work standpoint, has really made us better going forward. We had just rolled out Teams probably 90 to 120 days prior to the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit and we just did that mandatory telework, I think Microsoft says we were one of the fastest agencies that learned to use Teams as a whole around it. We weren't having that much, I'll call it, usage, right? Because we're still using a lot of that, I'll call the older technologies that we were comfortable with, right? When it comes to video, chats, and stuff like that. Right? And this really, it pushed us, right? It pushed us to take advantage of technologies and get out of our comfort zones around that. So I think we're in a really good spot going forward as an agency.
Okay. And, one other way to look at this here is just to going back to the automation being, a force multiplier for the cyber analysts here. How can automation play a critical role in I think the really desirous goal here of having continuous monitoring of the network activity? And, again, if there's anomalous activity on that network, that there are, there's a notification, there's a ping that's happening, and that you're able to respond to that in near real time.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like what Christine was saying earlier around that, and that is, us basically working closer with her to identify some of our routine stuff in our playbooks to set up bots going forward within our security operations center that we can take advantage of for some of our automated playbooks and stuff like that. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to be working closer with Christine on going forward.
Yeah, and I think from a help desk perspective, we also are, making sure that we can triage that data a little bit quicker. So we do have automations that do server checks, right? And they get those outages quicker to the admin. So of the applications that may be down. So that's another way that, could we potentially leverage some of, the SOC data versus, what's going on. But I think it's just getting things done faster, quicker, trying to keep up with, the actors. It's, we're being inundated. So not even only from just replies in itself, it could be a good reply or a bad reply. And it's like, how do you start to tweak your, you do have some systems that will, allow us to automatically just discard it, but then you need to take a deeper dive to make sure you didn't miss anything from a help desk perspective.
Okay. And just to bring this conversation home here, we've been talking pretty extensively about the here and now when it comes to NASA and Zero Trust, but looking forward to the next couple of years, because we know this isn't going away anytime soon. What should we be focused on in terms of the future of Zero Trust, and what you guys will particularly be focused on?
So for us, I would say in the out years, definitely from a SASE standpoint around it, moving away from the traditional VPN access and more towards the always on network around that and stuff like that. That's definitely on our roadmap as we move out in the next few years around that, and to continuing to push us even further around that. I think you're going to see at least at NASA a closer union, if you will, tie between Christine's office and our cybersecurity office as we go forward, because I think again, automation is being embraced at NASA, and we're not nervous of it on the cybersecurity side. The good thing about it is Christine and their shop over there have been doing the bots for a number of years now, so they've got a lot of maturity behind them. They've got a lot of lessons learned that they probably encountered in the early years going on that. So we're very comfortable with where they are for around that. So I'll just say we're a willing participant to work with them kind of going forward on this.
Okay, well, we have covered a lot of ground here in this conversation here, but just in terms of points that you'd like to underscore or highlight here, is there anything you'd like to leave with our audience?
One thing I can leave with is I would just say that, we work with CISA quite a bit. So our relationship with them is just phenomenal. I will say they bring a lot to the table to help out not only us, but other agencies. Also, the CIO Council and the federal CISO councils. So I have a really good relationship with the federal CISO, but also with the other federal agency CISOs out there and the communications that we have. I did a call just last week with a federal CISO from another department and stuff. So we're bouncing ideas off each other. We're sharing information with each other as we're looking at technologies out there that might be interesting as we're looking at them around here. We're sharing that with each other so that they can go and take a look at it to see if it might work within their organization as well or others. So it's not just I'll call it NASA working with inside NASA. I want to basically leave you with that the federal government, we are working together in partnership across the Federal CIO Council, across the Federal CISO Council, the CTO Council, as well as a really good relationship with CISA.
From my perspective, I would leave folks with bacon in that security. I mean, we hear that all the time, right? Bacon, security. I feel that the program from the NASA Shared Services perspective, because we were able to bring security early on back in 2016, 2017, made a huge difference, right? So are we perfect? Absolutely not. Do we have a ways to go? Yes. But I think if every program would really work with your CIOs and make sure you're really bridging those gaps with your ICAM folks, it leads just to a better successful program and a better security posture for your agency.
Okay, well, those are some great closing points there. I'd like to thank today's guests, Christine Jex, Intelligent Automation Service Lead at NASA's Shared Services Center, and Mike Witt, Senior Agency Information Security Officer and CISO for Cybersecurity and Privacy. I'm your moderator, Jory Heckman, and you're listening to Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on the Zero Trust Cyber Exchange.